It's more to do with the LA Times Lakers blog presenting another edition of Lakers Roundtable, and the Lakers are just coming off a few days removed from the NBA draft. A lot of the buzz and attention surrounding that day mostly centered on Ron Artest trying to legally change his name to Metal Peace, and besides the fact that it was pretty random of him to do that, part of the reason why that got more attention was the fact that the Lakers only had 4 second-round picks, but all counts to say that it was fairly good given the circumstances. One of the reasons was because the Lakers were able to select Darius Morris, coming off 2 seasons with the University of Michigan. They selected him with the 41st pick, so we're going to bring in someone who's followed his career and covered it pretty well for AnnArbor.com. Michael Rothstein, what's going on?
Hey, good to be here. Things are going well. I'm actually in New York right now where it's LA-like sunny weather, which is rare. Not used to.
Wow. So getting to go to the beach pretty soon?
Possibly after I'm done with this. We'll see.
Sounds good. Well, you followed his whole career. What do you think Morris can bring to the Lakers?
The first thing about Darius Morris is this. He's a very, very good passer. The scouts had said before the draft even started that he was the best pure point guard in the draft as far as his ability to pass. He has excellent vision. He has better vision than most of the point guards I've covered from any team in the past, 7, 8 years. He can really see the floor, and part of that is because of his height. He's 6'4". Actually, it's 6'5" now, which he said he grew to 6'5" in the middle of the season, and they refused to change his height. But the thing is with him is that the height gives him better vision. He can see over shorter guards. He's also really long, which NBA scouts really, really liked about him. He's a pretty good defender. He's not a great defender, but he's good. He's serviceable. He'll be able to guard. He'll cause problems for shorter guards because of his length, and he'll be able to stay with taller guards because he is somewhat fast. Shooting's still the big issue with him. He really was never able to shoot it well in his college career. He insisted that he was shooting it well in workouts, but didn't really see him shoot any in workouts, so I can't really speak to that he's improved that much. But he's confident about it. There's a hole in his game right now. It's that he's still, the shooting is a question. But when you have Kobe, I don't know how many shots he really needs to take.
Right. Now, you mentioned a little bit of his shooting. He only averaged 25% from three-point range his sophomore season. We were on the conference call with him after he got drafted, and he said that was the main point of emphasis he's going to be addressing in his off-season workouts. But you saw the games. You saw his shooting. What was going on with his three-point shot?
I think that the numbers skewed a little bit because he had the ball in his hands so much with what John point guard. It's very heavily reliant on the point guard making plays and creating and trying to drive and dish for shooters and working with the ball screens with Jordan Morgan. That sometimes he'll have the ball with 5 seconds left, 30 feet from the basket, through no fault of except what they were trying to run on their offense they didn't get. So then all of a sudden it's up to him to create, and if a defender stopped him, he'd have to let go a late shot clock, three-pointer or long two, and I think that contributed somewhat to the percentages that he had. However, he's not a really good shooter. He'll tell you that. But he worked hard on it last offseason from his freshman and sophomore year. He took anywhere between 500 to 1,000 jumpers a day. My guess is he does a similar routine during the lockout to really improve that shooting. He felt a lot more comfortable with his shot this year than last year. But it's still, I think, a work in progress, definitely.
Now, ever since he decided to declare his candidacy for the draft, there's immediate skepticism as far as whether he was actually ready. He had indicated that he hasn't held any regrets, even though there was even an expectation from the Lakers that if he had stayed another year, his draft stock would have gone even higher. But what's your read on that? Do you feel that he's ready for the NBA at this point?
Whether he's ready for the NBA or not, he made the right decision. And that was something I wrote the day that he decided to forego the final 2 years of his eligibility. And the reasons are simple, is that the way Michigan is growing with their team, he wasn't going to play 40 minutes a game this year. As good as he is, and Darius is a very, very good point guard, they have an incoming freshman named Trey Burke who's going to force some minutes. They have another incoming freshman named Carlton Brundage. They have a backlog in the backcourt which means that there's going to have to be more minute distribution. So that's the first reason he came out, because you play 30 minutes instead of 40 minutes, and if your production isn't the same, that raises red flags. The other thing is, too, is this draft was much weaker than the potentially loaded 2012 draft. So he very well could have been a much better player if he had come back next year and been a much better prospect. But he was still been drafted in the same spot because the players above him were just going to be better. So I think a lot of that came into play as to the good reasons why he came out. Plus, I think he'll be ready. I mean, at some point, he might not be ready his first year. He may have to be a D-League guy for a year, or maybe buried on the end of the bench for a year. But I think given a year to really work on his shot, and given a year to still grow into his body, he's only 20 years old, I think he has a chance to be a pretty good NBA player.
We're talking with Michael Rothstein with AnnArbor.com. You can follow him on Twitter. It's a pretty simple handle, Mike Rothstein, already up in the 2,000 range, right?
Yeah, we're doing what we can over in the Twitter world. It's a fun place.
Now, you had a really compelling story on him a few months ago where you talked about his relationship with Dan Tan at Windward School, local school out in Los Angeles. You kind of just talk about how that relationship came up and where it went from there. The story came up just because Dan died. Not to give away the story, you should read the story, but Dan died in January, and it really coincided with when Darius went into a big slump. And Darius had never used that as an excuse for why, but he was definitely pressing a little bit. He started writing "Rest in Peace, Dan Tan" on one of his ankles, which is how I found out about the story, because I saw he had written something on his ankle tape and had no idea what it was, and had to wait a week to try to get him alone to ask him what it was. And then from there, essentially, it just kind of became this story. But their relationship started from when Darius was a freshman at Windward. He was a young little cocky kid, and Dan Tan was a guy who had played basketball when he was younger, but had this disease, and it really started to affect his entire body. But Dan had really latched on to the Windward basketball program and to their coach, Miguel Villegas. And Coach Miguel had then told him about Darius, and they became fast friends, and the Morrises and the Tans had become very, very close. Even after Darius left, Dan would call his older brother, Dwayne, or his dad, also named Dwayne, and take them to Clippers games sometimes because they had Clippers tickets. And the guy was a huge basketball fan and a huge Clippers fan, and really a big Darius Morris fan. When Darius went to Michigan, he had Michigan clothes and wore them every game, even though he couldn't really see the TV. He'd watch. He'd do what he can to see it. But I'd say in the past 3 months before his death, he got a lot worse. And that was kind of when people started to know. And Darius didn't know. I don't even think Darius knew how sick he was until his assistant coach at Windward called him, and that was, I think, about a week before he died, and told him. Then they had one final conversation. It was very, very Hollywood-esque, at least from the way it was described to me, and the just everything that had happened. But I know the relationship is something that's very, very important to Darius, because Darius really looked to him for inspiration, because all the pain that Dan was going through, he never really showed it at all. And Darius has always kind of told me that whenever he'd complain about something, he would then think about Dan Tan, and he would stop complaining because he's like, I'm still just playing basketball. Right, and another important relationship that Darius talked with us over the conference call was just with Windward in general. He mentioned that they're planning to retire his jersey, and also just how growing up in the LA area, he always idolized the Lakers and tried to emulate their game after Magic and Kobe and the like. But I guess when he was at University of Michigan, did he talk about any of those influences and how that shaped him as a player?
He didn't really talk about Kobe or Magic, at least not to me. He talked a lot about his brother. He used to follow his brother's a few years older than him, played over in Europe. And he used to follow his brother when he was a kid down to the park when they lived in Hawthorne and when they lived in Redondo. He'd ride on his bike when he had training wheels and he'd be really slow. And then his dad, not his dad, his brother would, have to go back and get him because all of his brother's friends who were a few years older were, saying, why is this kid coming with us? That really helped shape his game early. He's always said that a lot of what he learned in the game came from his brother. And so I think his brother was a very, very large influence there. As far as Windward goes, the thing with Windward is that he went there for academics, essentially. He got a large scholarship there, academics. He's a smart kid. But they really didn't have much of a basketball program when he got there. And he led to a state title as a senior. And he really, Miguel Villegas, who's their coach at Windward, basically told me, he said he was a pioneer. He was the first one at Windward. So he has a very special relationship with the school because of that. And just people that I talked with at the school when I was reporting on the story on Dan Tan all said the same thing, that Darius is still very, very highly regarded there.
And lastly, Michael, we've been talking about his skill set, just his background, and just given the Lakers and their roster, realistically speaking, what kind of things do you think that he needs to hone on to secure a roster spot for next season?
I mean, I think he just needs to do what he does well. I think he's a guy who can play in the NBA. Do I think he's a guy who will be an all-star one day? I don't know, probably not, just because, if his shooting improves, it's certainly possible. But he's a guy who can play in the NBA. I think he's a guy that the Lakers will view as somebody who is someone who they need to work with for a couple of years to get NBA ready, to get to work on his shot. But the passing skills, the wanting to play defense, the ability to play defense, the confidence he has, and he makes players around him better. All of those things usually will give a guy a roster spot, at least in my opinion.
So those are the thoughts of Michael Rothstein of AnnArbor.com. Mike, thanks a lot for all your time.
Hey, no problem. Anytime.